Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Covering's first interactive session. All right? So if you've read the screen, we want to make sure you download your app. What we have today is a conversation. All right? And so it's from the field. We got our consultants up here. We're going to be talking. We're going to have you. I'm going to be walking around, and Melissa will be walking around with a microphone. Melissa's right here. If you have questions and are afraid to use your app, you can actually ask Melissa to come over and you can ask a question. Otherwise, please use your app. We're going to have some polls throughout the conversation that we're having today. And I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it's going to be something new. We move into new technology here as we move forward. So download your app. On your app, you'll see a button that says From the Field. Push that From the Field button. Okay, I see people shaking their head. If anyone needs any help, I can actually have my man Matthew come out here and help you. But everyone okay? Do you understand what we're doing? So there's a Coverings app. Once you get the Coverings app, it takes about a minute to load. Once you get that, at the bottom it will say From the Field. There'll be a button, From the Field. I want you to click on that, and then it will show you some poll questions. So those are the polls we're going to have. And then below that, it's social questions and answers. So as we're going through this conversation, type in a question, all right? As I see it, if it's pertinent to what we're talking about, I'm going to ask the guys. I'm going to stop them in mid-sentence probably. I'm going to interrupt them and let them know that we have questions. How we're going to do this is I'm going to introduce the first person here. They're going to let us know a little bit about their company and what they do, and then pass it on to the next person, and then we'll start our program. So our first consultant is James Wolfel from Art Craft Granite, Marble, and Tile. James? Yeah, you can go ahead.
Oh, let me have the speaker. I'm James Wellfill with Artcraft Granite, Marble, and Tile. I'm an NTCA recognized consultant. I certainly don't have the resume that these three gentlemen do. I've been doing it for about 3 or 4 years, and I'm trying to learn from the best in the industry. I'm also president of the NTCA, and I'm chairman of the NTCA Technical Committee. Okay.
I forgot to say one thing I want you all to know. Look over here, we got our graphic reporter. What he's doing today is he's going to be drawing what we're talking about. Think about that. So it's like a court reporter. And then we're going to have these drawings will be in the hall right outside of North Hall, and they'll be displayed throughout today and tomorrow. You'll be able to look at the drawings, come by and see what we were discussing and how he views those as an artist.
Yeah, the best thing about today for me is I don't get to talk. I get to listen and pass anything on to these three very fine gentlemen. So, good morning. Jim's already explained that. It's an AIA-approved session. The objectives are examine qualifications and functions of tile consultants, discuss tile industry specifications and ideas on how they can be improved, examine the current state of tile and stone installation quality and cite common mistakes that could be avoided. NTCA recognized consultants are respected by the construction industry, respected by the tile industry, and are committed to standard developments. All these gentlemen sit on various committees developing standards for the United States installation community. Common questions. What does a consultant do? What makes them qualified? And whose side are they on? That's a really good question, whose side they're on. Let's start with Donato. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Donato Pompo. My company is Ceramic Tile and Stone Consultants. I've been in business as a consulting company for the last 13 years. My background is I started out in the union as an installer, then got drafted and was in the military for a couple of years, and went to college, have a biochemistry education with an MBA. And then I spent 17 years as an importer and distributor with a family business where we had a number of locations and showrooms. We did a lot of architectural sales. And then I went to work for Ladecrete International as a regional sales manager. So I was a sales manager for 7 years where we worked with many contractors and architects in promoting those installation products and systems. I sit on all the major industry standard committees that set the standards for the industry, and what our company does is we do forensic investigations. So when there's a failure, we go out and investigate to see what the issue is, figure out how best to remediate the problem, and often we get involved in litigation as expert witnesses. We also do architectural specifications and quality control services, helping to make sure that new projects are installed correctly. We also have an online university, the University of Ceramic, Tile, and Stone, where we provide online training both from a sales point of view and a technical point of view. And I'm happy to be here today to share my experiences and opinions. Thank you.
Donato, can you tell us a little bit about the couple slides that you have right here as we're going through them?
Yeah, why don't we go back to the last one? If you can back up.
Go forward, James.
Okay.
This is an interesting project in Bighorn Golf Course. It's a small $125 million second home. There's 3 swimming pools that all interconnected with Bazazza Venetian glass mosaics, all shaped in as boats. There's also a master bedroom swimming pool, and then there's a 20,000 square foot reflection pond with these little limestone islands throughout it. There's 32,000 square feet of limestone on the interior, 10,000 square feet in the garage of granite, and then all the exterior veneer is mechanical anchored sandstone, which we worked on this project, writing specifications, doing quality control services on a full-time basis for just about 2 years. So it was quite an interesting project. This is a project in Silver Springs, Maryland, where it was a Venetian glass mosaic mural that had actually failed, and so we came in and came up with a remediation process to have it repaired, and it was an outdoor mall water feature for kids to come and interact with.
See, that's the you don't have to talk.
This is a project, an exterior veneer building, Intuit building in San Diego. It's a large campus where they had sandstone on the exterior veneer. Now this is a interesting case right here, is right up here at the edge right here, what they had done is they had mitered the limestone together, and they were budding, and they had grout in there, but they weren't soft joints, and literally the tile broke at the top on all the corners on the side, and we're just hanging off of the side. And that's a good example of why we need to have movement joints. And if you don't have movement joints and there's expansion, particularly when the temperature in these areas get up to over 140 degrees, you've got to have movement joints in order to mitigate the movement and the stress and avoid failures.
Dave?
Thank you.
How did we get to me? Okay, Dave Govas. My family has a background in tile. My great-grandfather was in the tile business, and my grandfather, but my grandfather was my mother's father. So I got involved in it. My brother Steve, who's here with me today, he was involved in it. I started early 70s. Actually, I started when I could carry buckets, because my grandfather was in South Georgia and used to go down there and help them. And young guys always get to carry buckets. So one time we had a whole bucket to do. We had a bucket at church. Anyways, did tile for 28 years. Ran a shop, hourly employees. Somebody came along with a nice offer and thought they could do it better, so I sold it to him. And then they recruited me to go down to Ceramic Tile Education Foundation. That was just getting fired up at the time. and they asked me if I'd stay for a little while, and that ended up being 10 years. I left there in 2008. Started doing some independent consulting. Kind of the way it started was, Dave, would you mind taking these phone calls, you know, until we can get somebody else? And that's been going on since 2008. So we go around all over the place, pretty much do the same kind of thing. I guess I get a little bit more technical on the tile end and the thin set end. Not more technical than these guys, because that's one point I wanted to make. You know, I talk to a lot of people, they say, oh yeah, you know, you and Rich or you and Donato or whatever. Hey, we all work together all the time. You know, this is like attorneys, same thing with James. I've sent all three of these guys work. They've probably sent me work too. You know, it's just like attorneys. There's no animosity in it. It's there's only so many people that do this. That previous slide he was showing, that was actually a cleaning study. We had some people that were complaining they couldn't keep the floors clean, and it ended up that they were using blue pads and an acidic cleaner and basically just grinding the floor. The floor looked like a moonscape. I get into a lot of the microscopic kind of stuff. This particular project here, this was a reflecting pond for the Supreme Court, and the not enough movement accommodation joints in the tile, and then it was outside in full sun with water on and off. They emptied it for the winter. That was and no movement joints, blew up. On that particular one, we sounded the deck. The question was, can we save it or do we have to replace it? They make this little rotary tapping device. It's called a delamination tool. Gives you an indication of if something's hollow or not hollow. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's positively bad. I mean, if it's on a membrane, that's one sound. If it's on a concrete slab, that's another sound. You really have to understand the apparatus, but we sounded that particular job just to kind of assess where it was at, because that one was bonded to concrete, and they had two ponds. I think it was 50% on one, 70% on the other. They were trash.
Rich?
Good morning. My name is Rich Goldberg. I'm an architect and president of Professional Consultants International and also Procon Consulting Architects. And we actually have two different entities. Professional Consultants handles forensic investigations and expert witness work. And our practice is divided so that Procon Consulting Architects works on the design side. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, because from a lot of our forensic and expert witness experience, we find that more and more clients are calling on us to actually be involved in the design process now. I have a professional degree in architecture. I'm licensed in 50 states, actually. I have NCARB certification, which is an interesting point. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on, about certifications and qualifications for being a consultant. So in addition to being a licensed architect, I practiced architecture for about 15 years. And then one day I just decided I was looking for an alternate career, AKA recession. And I decided to take up a position with Laticrete International, like Donato. And I became director of Laticrete Technical Services for about 10 years. And after I left, I guess I was restless and looking for something different to do again. I decided to become a consultant. I've been doing that for the last 16 years. So it's the 16th anniversary for me. So our practice, as I mentioned, is divided into two different components, and we have 7 employees on one side and 3 on the other. But we really get involved, because of my architectural experience, we have a sort of a multidisciplinary architectural and engineering approach to things. not unlike what Dave and Donato do, but also a little bit different. But we get involved in really highly specialized areas of technical expertise, and not only specialize in ceramic tile and stone and engineered stone, but also get involved with mechanically anchored dimension stone and porcelain rain screen walls. We get involved in ancillary areas to the tile and stone industry, such as terrazzo, waterproofing, and then I also have my primary expertise is as a building envelope and facade specialist. So in many cases, we get involved in either forensic investigation of building facade failures, or we get asked to be an exterior envelope consultant. But our practice is primarily limited to large-scale complex work such as retail shopping centers, airports, hotels, institutional buildings, and high-rise and mid-rise office buildings. As I mentioned, because of my architectural and engineering background, and also we employ structural engineer on staff also, we take a very highly scientific engineering approach to both our design and our forensic investigation and failure analysis. And I showed an example here in the bullet points. Everyone in the room is familiar with tile industry standards for movement joints, for example. In many, many cases, it's acceptable to refer to those industry standards when you see that there's a problem with movement joints. But we always go one step further. Rather than rely on a rule of thumb, we actually do computational analysis and take into consideration the coefficient of expansion of materials, the temperature ranges. We look at the way the sun comes through skylights and whether there's what is known as a frit on the glass and the shading coefficient, and get very highly technical, and we'll actually determine whether there is or is not a need for a movement joint and how often they need to be. So the industry standards are a very effective and conservative rule of thumb, but we like to go one step further. This is one of our projects which actually won the grand prize in tile design and construction last year at Coverings. This is the Hilton Rainbow Tower at the Hilton Hawaiian Village in Honolulu. And I have to publicly thank Donato, because Donato's firm actually did the forensic investigation on this project, and then unfortunately for him, they hired our firm to do the design, because we had, I guess, better design capabilities or engineering capabilities. I don't really know the reason why, but our firm became the design architect of record, and we teamed up with another architect, and this was actually the restoration and the replication of two 30-story tile murals that were designed in 1968, and they had failed maybe within 5 or 10 years after they were installed. And we actually had to employ highly technical digital replication techniques. We actually got up on scaffolding, did high resolution digital photography of every single existing tile, because there was no record of the existing design. The original artist actually laid this tile out in a large warehouse and literally applied the glaze. He was like a mad Jackson Pollock guy, and never documented the design. So we had to start from scratch and replicate every single tile. So we used some pretty interesting digital techniques, and also used high definition digital inkjet printing, and all the tile was manufactured over in the UK and shipped here, and this was the project of a lifetime. And Hilton Worldwide actually engaged our firm not only to design this project, but to provide full-time observation of the construction. And it's perfect, and it's been in service for the last 3 years. So we're very, very proud of that project. And this project goes all the way back to my beginnings when I was with Ladecrete, and this was one of the first major ceramic tile facade projects that I was asked to come into and provide a more of an architectural and engineering approach to the application of the ceramic porcelain tile on the facade of Disney's headquarters in Orlando. So that project dates back to 1990, I believe. So that those two projects are at the two extremes of my career as really as a specialty consultant. So I think that at this point we're going to discuss these topics. Why don't we just go back one slide, and I guess maybe I'll start the conversation off on.
Yeah, this is my photo.
Let me ask a question.
Oh yeah, that's
guys.
still my photo.
Gentlemen,
okay, I'll talk about.
Gentlemen, let me ask a quick question. I'm going to get into this real quick. I want everyone to know there's 35 of you that are online right now, but there's more than 35 of you. So get on your tablets, your phones, and start asking questions. We did have, before we get too far into it, we had a question for Donato on your one of the project you showed where the fountain failed, and someone wants to know why that fountain failed.
On the exterior veneer high-rise?
Yes.
Yeah, what it was, again, it was a limestone tile. They had mitered the horizontal shelf to the vertical wall, and they had a cork miter, and so at the bottom of the cork miter was actually touching, and so they had a joint, the space from the miter there, that they filled with cementitious grout. Now, like one of the things you're going to hear from all of us is that when there's a problem, it's normally not due to one deficiency. Generally speaking, it's due to many compounding deficiencies. So in this case, not only did they not have a movement joint there, but also that top part of the tile, when they installed it, they had very little thin set contact. The 2/3 of the tile below the top was bonded extremely well, was tenaciously attached. But at the top, they apparently didn't want to get their fingers dirty or something, and they didn't put much thin set at the top. So that, meaning that when the tile, because of the temperature, we recorded temperatures I think as high as 160 degrees. So as that tile expands, it creates a stress, and if the tile is bonded well, it can restrain to a degree. In this case, it actually, right where the thin set coverage ended, it actually broke and was lodged away from the side of the building. So lack of movement joints compounded by lack of bond is what caused that problem.
And quickly, there's a question on the one that was on the floor. The fountain on the floor.
Oh, that was Dave. That was Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. David?
Okay. What was the question on the fountain?
Why did the fountain floor fail?
The one at Bighorn. Whoever had the Bighorn.
Oh, Bighorn.
Well, I don't know.
There wasn't a fountain floor at Bighorn. There was a fountain that Dave did in front of the Supreme Court.
Oh, the fountain, the mosaic fountain?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, that was ours. It was, part of lack of movement joints, also lack of thin set coverage. It was in a freeze-thaw area. So actually it was completely redone. We went in, and because tiles were coming loose, became a safety hazard because children running across this and these glass mosaics becoming dislodged. So we reinstalled it with a latex fortified mortar and high strength thin set adhesive, put in movement joints around the perimeters, and also segmented the circle in order to remediate the problem.
Great. Gentlemen, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, that's the same reason mine came apart. However, it was skateboards that were in mine.
Okay.
I have a question for Donato. Can I ask him a question?
You can ask questions. It's a conversation.
Consultant to consultant. One of the things I was talking a little bit before in my discussion about my qualifications is that we tend to apply an engineering approach to things like movement joints, not so much because I like doing it and making myself feel smart, but our clients are demanding that now, and I think that we're going to get into that in a little later in this presentation or discussion about, you see even some of this scientific equipment here, like a tensile pull strength tester, clients are now demanding quantitative, specific data as to the cause of failures. It's no longer sufficient for them, for us to just say it failed because of movement joints. Believe me, because I'm experienced and I know that the Tile Council of North America or ANSI standards requires movement joints. No, they want you to do calculations. So I guess I'm asking you the question: do you see that more and more clients demanding that you substantiate your opinions with scientific equipment and calculations?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only the client, and generally speaking, the clients who are demanding that are the ones who are the attorneys, because strategically, when you go into litigation, the opposing side is going to try to twist whatever facts there are against you and try to discredit you. So if you don't follow the industry standards exactly in your approach, if you don't follow the testing procedure, the ASTM protocol, in doing something correctly, then the attorney's going to come around, the opposing attorney, during a deposition and saying, okay, well, if you didn't follow the instructions there, then how can we rely on what you did over here? So it's very important that whatever we do, that we don't just simply give an opinion, but we substantiate what we say. So here in this case, we have a portable tensile pull digital device. Now, in our industry, everything is based on shear bond strength. And tensile bond strength, there's no direct relationship between the two. Although Rich, when he was over at Laticrete, authored a book on facades, and he and I often reference a study that he references in there about the relationship between tensile strength and shear bond. There's no exact relationship, but there's been studies showing that tensile strength was about 57% of shear bond. So we can do a tensile pull test, and then we can, divide that by 0.57 and give an approximate idea of what the shear bond value is. Because again, our industry is shear bond, and the building code is in shear bond as well.
So overall, just as an overview, they're going to give you they're giving the technical reasons why we have pull tests and things like that. I want to kind of go through these tests and not really comment on them, just show them a brief overview, but I kind of want to get more into, I think some of the contractors in here want to know, when you're called out on a job, things like that. So let me get through these pull tests and we'll have a discussion about...
James, let me interrupt here. A lot of questions coming up on movement joints, lippage.
Right.
Real quickly, why don't architects draw movement joints on their plans? What do you guys, when you're working with an architect?
Yeah, after this. Jim, let me get through these little tests first, and then we'll go and comment on all that.
Great.
Why there's failures.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first.
By the way, I've got about 1 million questions here.
Right.
So
the first one was a pull test. This one's measuring lippage. It's a micrometer measuring lippage. Obviously, there's some lippage. And whose slide is this?
Yeah, let me point this out. This is an actual shear bond testing device that I developed about 10 years ago. And we've done hundreds of tests with it. It's just about ready to be approved as an ASTM protocol through the ASTM C18 Stone Committee. But it's a device that we developed because we wanted to be able to quantitatively measure the shear bond value of something. Because one of the problems with tensile pull is that if you go over a plaster substrate or a backer board, those materials, the tensile strength of those materials are very low, and you can't really find out whether or not what the bond strength is of it. So we came up with this device.
This is obviously coring the tile to find out what the sandwich is in the installation sandwich. And there's the piece that came out. Whose picture is this?
That's mine. There was a second floor of a mall. There was a 2-story mall. The first floor had nice new terrazzo on it. But the second floor, they left carpet tile on. So this other company came and bought the mall, and they decided they wanted to put the terrazzo on. And I was working for the company, so they said, as a contractor, so they said, what do you think about putting terrazzo on here? And I went out there and I sounded it with that rotary percussion device. Sounded pretty hollow. I says, I think we need to take a look at a slab. And if you look at that core, that thing is sheared at that's a layer of colored concrete. Then there was a topping slab. Then there was the structural slab. And the colored concrete and the topping slab both sheared from the structural slab, and they were going to put in epoxy terrazzo. So in other words, you had a whole bunch of stepping stones. Cost them about $1.5 million to redo that.
Right, there's Robinson's floor test.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll explain that a little bit. So you already saw that we no longer use tape measures in the field because, again, our clients are demanding highly scientific answers and quantitative reasons why things fail. So we use digital calipers to measure thicknesses of thinset, or as you saw earlier, to measure lippage, because it's very impressive, as Donato mentioned, when you start dealing with construction defect litigation, that you have to have everything covered. And the attorneys that you're dealing with love this kind of stuff. But these kind of tools are available to contractors on a daily basis, and you really, and one of the reasons we're doing this presentation is to make everybody aware of these tools and resources are available for design purposes and evaluation purposes. And I know there's a later slide where we said it's easier to do things the right way the first time than to have guys like us come in and use these types of resources to prove that you did things wrong. On the right side, we have highly specialized equipment, just like Donato and Dave maintain. We actually have one of the only portable Robinson floor tester in the country, and we typically use that again on large construction defect cases where the attorneys are more than willing to spend millions of dollars of the insurance company's money. But these tests are available also on a design base, and we find that they're more often employed now on a design basis on large-scale projects. In other words, if an airport concourse contract is worth $15 million to install the stone, our clients consider it a worthwhile expense to spend $10,000 or $15,000 actually testing the performance of the floor right on site, which is what you cannot do in the laboratory test. So this again is another tool, again mostly for large-scale projects, but now we have the capability to do performance load testing in the field the same way we can do shear testing and tensile pull.
Oh, let's get into what really matters for tile contractors. And usually the two problems that I run into are the fact that the job's not ready, and the second fact is that the concrete's always bad. And we have a position statement that the NTCA put out for Division 3 versus Division 9. When you guys are looking at jobs, besides movement joints and failure of waterproofing, is substrate preparation usually the biggest problem out there?
You gonna start with me or somebody?
I'll start with you, David.
It's a big issue. And I guess what we've been finding a lot lately, it used to be curing compounds was a big issue. And it's still an issue, but now that everybody's talking about the floor's got to get flatter because of the tighter tolerances for the bigger tile, instead of screeding the floor, pulling the screed across the slab a few times, these guys are trying to beat it into submission with riding trowels, and they're compressing the top of the slab. It's getting to be an issue. And myself, I've looked at a lot of fly ash stuff too, with the Leeds credits and the fly ash slabs. Just my own experience, once you get over 18–20%, things start getting pretty slippery. It's not something that I don't think the thinset guys have looked at a whole lot, but I've done a whole lot of tests with it, and it makes a big difference. So slab compaction, burnishing the slab has gotten to be an issue. The slab is never going to be flat enough. The report I just finished writing before I came down here was substrate prep. Temporary heat, they carbonized the top of the slab, Nobody ground it. They could have just run sandpaper over the top of it and you could have stuck to it. But instead they stuck it over a latence layer. Nothing stuck. The whole thing's coming out.
Rich, you wrote that article in Tile Letter a few years ago about the floor flatness of concrete, on how it's measured. And that kind of opened our eyes, the NTCA's eyes, to how important floor preparation was at that point. Do you remember that article?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, that's really I guess the conundrum, I'm using big words here. The conundrum is the disparity between the tile industry requirements today for large format tile regarding substrate flatness or concrete flatness versus the concrete industry's requirement. And I think that both industries have pretty much given up forcing one or the other into their position. We've eventually taken the position that we now require 1/8 of an inch in 10 feet or 1/16 of an inch in a localized 2-foot area for large format tile. And it means that the average slab is not placed to that flatness tolerance, because that's not the tolerance that the concrete industry can effectively and affordably work to. So on every single project now, you're always going to have that disparity between the flatness of the concrete slab that conforms to the concrete industry standards versus what our industry requires. So one of the things that we're going to get into, I think in a few moments, we have a poll question coming up.
You're correct.
About substrate preparation, but we're finding now in our practice, whether it's on the forensic side or on the design side, that floor flattening or leveling, i.e. self-leveling underlayments, or in many cases, a lot of projects are going back to full mortar beds now. They're saying, forget about trying to achieve an appropriate slab with proper flatness, without shrinkage cracking. We're just going to forget about it. We're going to put a cleavage membrane down and place a mortar bed so that we can control the quality of the surface for the tile. So that's really the problem. And we're basically advising clients on the design side now that floor leveling is no longer an option. It used to be an option, like patching as necessary or leveling as necessary in the specifications. Today, we say you must have a section in there, and it's a required part of the tile installation or the concrete contractor's, I guess, trade division to install a self-leveling underlayment.
I was actually doing a scope review here on the floor for a contractor back in Phoenix, and they're setting 2-foot by 4-foot porcelain. And I said, you need to carry a number for flattening the floor.
That's right. It's foolish.
Right.
It's foolish today not to include that in the budget, because it becomes a huge surprise when you find out on a large-scale project that all of a sudden you have to budget for leveling of 100,000 square feet, and people are screaming and pointing fingers.
I'll tell you what we're going to do.
Gentlemen, real quickly.
We're going to do
we had our poll question.
Right. I was going to
really good one. Why does the GC or owner assume that floor prep includes floor repair to bring the concrete to tolerance for installing tower stone?
Yeah, Donato wants you to answer that.
Would you read that again?
Yeah, I will. Why does the GC or a owner of a building assume that floor prep includes floor repair to bring the concrete to tolerance for tile installation?
Yeah, well, that's something that needs to be qualified when you first get into a job. I mean, it's really, if there's an architect involved, it's a responsibility of the architect to specify what the process is and who has that responsibility. And as you bid a job, you've got to either, you know, acknowledge that that it needs that work, and whether or not you're bidding that work, or whether you're going to have it as an exclusion on your bid. But you know, it's something that is important. For instance, right now, tomorrow we have a project in Brooklyn, New York, a Macy's store, 5-story building, where we're going in advance and evaluating all the existing floors in the building. And because they're going to be doing a restoration, and they want to know what do they have to do to prepare all these floors for a tile installation. And of course, in a building like that, you've got multiple layers of material, everything from carpet to tile to terrazzo. So it's really important that when you get a project, that you actually go out there and inspect it and you look for deficiencies. One of the important things are cracks, and determining whether those cracks are simply shrinkage cracks that can be mitigated with a crack isolation membrane, or do those cracks have some vertical displacement indicating that they're structural cracks and that they're going to require some extensive repairs, such as putting dowels and epoxying them in order to stabilize it. So it's got to be qualified. And to answer the question is that they don't know better, and that's why they assume you as a tile contractor, you're going to come in and whatever the problem is, you're going to take care of it and it's included in your bid. But you've got to clearly put in your bids exclusions for like that. If there's any concealed damages or conditions that you run into once you start a job, it's got to be clear in your contract that that's added work. That's not part of your work, and it'll be an additional cost.
All right, you guys, so everybody get your pad out. We're going to give you 30 seconds to answer this poll. Go ahead and start it, James.
What percentage of concrete slabs you work on need prep work done? That's the poll question.
Right.
So 30 seconds.
Hit the next button. All right, you got 30 seconds. And you guys, let me ask you, each one of you, what is yours? What is your answer? What do you think?
I've never seen one that didn't need work.
So more than 60%?
I've never seen one.
More than 60%.
Yeah, I would say 100% need preparation to some degree. You know, whether it's just washing the floor. I mean, if you do the basic water test and you see it absorbs and you know that the concrete is clean. I mean, we run into a lot of jobs where you've got paint overspray, you've got drywall mud that they're installing over.
Well, more than 60% is correct, but we had 2,885%.
No, it's
85%. 28 respondents.
Okay. What it says on here, 85%, you guys. So
I don't think
these guys out here are reading that. So
that proves our point.
Yeah, it proves your point.
I think,
right.
from a contractor's perspective in the field, pretty much because of the size of the tiles and the planks now, every slab that we look at has to have some sort of preparation. And I think contractors need to take that into account every time they walk on a job. Dave?
30 years ago, every slab we did, we hit with 3.5 12 paper and a vacuum. That was before big tile. That was 6 by 6 and 8 by 8. In our shop, we've never done a job without grinding the floor or cleaning the floor. Of my brother Steve, after I sold the company, Steve went on to work for a couple other shops. Never seen another grinder.
Well, this slide right here is just common sense for the contractors out there. You grind it, you patch it, you level it, scarifying it, shot blasting, bead blasting, or you install a mud bed like Rich talked about. The flatter the floor, the better the installation is going to be. Plus, especially with the dense porcelains too, and the size of them, you really have to have grab into that substrate.
Right.
Gentlemen, before you leave, so title of this slide is Get Paid to Fix It First.
Right.
The question we have here is, what are the costs involved with having a consultant investigate a job site situation and prepare a report?
Dave.
Give an idea, a range.
A lot.
A lot. I think honestly, I think all of us here would probably would be somewhere in the order of anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to prepare or to conduct a comprehensive investigation and prepare a comprehensive report. And some people are just blown away by that cost, thinking that $400 or $500 that you can walk in and do that, and we would all be doing a disservice to clients if we just did a one paragraph saying, well, this project failed because there's no movement joints in accordance with Tile Council of North America standard EJ 171. I mean, that's just a silly way of approaching things. So I know our firm prides ourselves on being very comprehensive, and we will decline anybody that second guesses that type of approach will decline that work. And I'm pretty sure that Donato and Dave do the same thing these days. It's serious stuff, and probably the most important thing is that in many cases those reports can come back to haunt you, because eventually a dispute can evolve into construction defect litigation. You can really be embarrassed by another consultant who's hired to do a comprehensive report if you're not comprehensive. So we refuse to back down on that, and that's just for a basic one-time full day investigation, going back, doing all the research, the requisite research, reviewing all the documents, the specifications, the code requirements, preparing a comprehensive report, and that's what it costs. Plus travel. We all travel nationally across the country, so we have to factor in our travel time also. Dave?
I'd also, in the cost of that report, we all carry errors and omissions insurance. I had a job last year that wanted $17 million worth of insurance, including $4 million in case I made the commons area dusty and they had to clean them all in the light fixtures. When we put our name on something, we're exposing ourselves to a liability. And that's why we don't short shot something if we're going to do it. If we're going to do it, we're all in. Because there's no thing as kind of sort of liable. They're going to want you to be liable.
Yeah, it's important that we do our due diligence when we do a project, just like Rich said, because if it ends up in litigation, the opposing attorneys are going to do whatever they can to discredit you, so it's important.
Eat you alive.
And I normally tell people that it's going to cost $3,000 or more, depending on the extent of the investigation. Unfortunately, we get hundreds of phone calls of people who can't afford our service. So what we do on our website, we have a section on there, Ask the Expert. So I tell people who can't afford our services to go online and they can ask a question, and we give them free advice that way. Because, we're really concerned about the industry. I mean, we want problems to go away. In fact, much of our business is growing in doing quality control, which is actually preventing these problems, which is a lot less expensive than having to pay for the forensics after the fact.
Great answer.
We're just going. Yeah, we're just.
I got to tell you about this one. This is mine. This was a car dealer. They had 3 dealerships, and I think this was a Mini Cooper. And the sun came out one day after the winter time and buckled the floor next to it. And this was custom order tile. And the guy asked me, how long do you think it'd take to get the tile out of there? And can we save it? Because it was a special order for Mini Cooper. And I says, I don't think you're going to save it. They took every single piece of tile out of that showroom in one piece in a day. That's how loose that floor was. All them windows there, they put the stuff in the wintertime, and then the sun came and springtime came, boom, gone. One day is all it took. I can't remember how big it was. It's thousands of feet, obviously.
Wow.
Gentlemen, can I back up a little bit? There are so many questions here in regards to concrete and a flat and level surface. And the questions are, when our industry uses leveling terminology, they seem to feel like they get in trouble very easily, and because they don't level a substrate and they flatten them. So why do all these companies call their products self-leveling? Why could there be a terminology?
I want that.
You got it.
I gotta have it. I paid for that question. Years ago, we did this hospital, and we used Ardex K15. At the time, we're talking years ago, there weren't a whole lot of self-levelers out there. So I wrote the change order just like the product says, use Ardex K15 self-leveler, blah, blah, blah. And we poured 5 floors of this hospital. And when we got to the end of the job, it was a change. And at the time, I remember the price, it was $76,000. And they said, well, the architect went out there, Bob Salitra, and he put a level on the floor, and he said the floor's not level. And I says, yeah, but it's flat. And he says, yeah, but you wrote a change request to level the floor. And I said, well, we just need a flat floor. There's nothing about level. And he says, well, then that's the way you should have wrote it. And denied my change. It took me a couple of years to pay that off. Then they just completely lined out the change.
No,
so I learned about the difference between flat and level.
And that's something that we've been pushing for, is to change it to you know, Chris Walker's flowable mortars or flattening materials, because that's the first thing I do now. I don't even call them levelers anymore. We call them flattening materials because the liability that it's carrying. Same with crack isolation and anti-fracture. I cannot stand people who call it anti-fracture or crack suppression, because that's not what it does. It isolates the crack and moves it to the weakest point of the joint of the installation. And pretty soon somebody's going to catch somebody on liability and say, well, that didn't stop the floor from cracking. You know, it said anti-fracture, but it didn't stop it. So that's another thing that I think we need to consider.
So terminology in our industry needs to really be careful.
Yes. Any more questions?
Those actually, I had 3 of the same question come in.
Okay.
Exactly that. So,
well, I think kind of what we wanted to do here is talk about, we were talking about it in the speaker's room. I don't think consultants go on a job site, and you guys do very big, huge technical type things, but more of a simple, say a school or even a house. I don't think consultants go to the job site called by the owner to remove that tile on purpose, to replace it and remove it. I think you try to save installations, and you try to protect the contractor, don't you? I think that's one of the misconceptions is that consultants just try to bury tile contractors.
For me personally, burying a tile guy, there's nothing in the whole world that feels, it's just like firing an employee. It feels really, really bad, and it took me a while to acclimate to that. You know, there's somebody here in this room who I was a contractor that I was against, and he didn't deserve it, but I was hired by the owner. I told him, call Rich. Off the record, I told him, call Rich. He didn't deserve what he was getting. It just didn't deserve it. No, we don't go looking for the contractor.
Yeah,
we look for answers. That's what we're looking for.
I find just the opposite, and everyone may find it strange. With me being an architect, I would say that in 30% of the cases where there may be circumstantial evidence that a contractor may be at fault, and I'll actually talk about this slide in a moment, that it's really, there's a fundamental origin of the problem in many cases with the architect, but people always seem to be afraid to, you know, go there and make those kinds of allegations, and I don't, and people think sometimes that that's kind of weird that I'm attacking my own colleagues, but I really feel that there's been a disservice to, in many trades and industries, that the architects need to take a little bit more responsibility for what they do. In this particular case, this was actually at Indianapolis, the new Indianapolis airport from maybe 10 years ago, and they placed a concrete slab that was 300 feet in diameter without any control joints. Now, the architect specified fiber reinforced concrete, so just assumed that, and I guess they were maybe sold a bill of goods by the manufacturer of the fibers, that they did not need any control joints to control shrinkage. Well, this thing not only cracked, but I think there's advance one slide here. The crack was over a half an inch, like 3/4 of an inch wide, and you can see there on the close-up the fibers. And the fibers couldn't withstand that kind of movement over 300 feet. So something went wrong there in the design process. They still needed control joints. The fibers can reduce the frequency of the control joints, but not totally eliminate them. And they had a 300-foot distance with no control of shrinkage whatsoever. And that's what resulted, and there was a big claim, and there was a significant structural repair that had to take place as a result of that.
So let's go back to
that's the widest crack that we've ever encountered on a project, close to, you can see there, almost close to an inch.
Gentlemen, let's go back to that very first question then. Why don't architects do a better job of drawing movement joints on their architectural drawings?
Well, I think the problem is they don't understand it, and they also don't want the liability. So they typically cut and paste, and they'll make reference to the ANSI standards or the Tile Council handbook if you're lucky, and they think that relieves them of responsibility. And they really don't know how to do it. There's actually ASTM standards out there that tell you how to calculate what the requirement is for movement joints, and actually gives you charts showing you what the high and low temperature is for each geographic area, literally around the world. So the information is there, but it's more than they want to deal with. Even the structural engineers will avoid doing it. So quite often they come to us if they can afford it, and generally speaking, architects are pretty cheap. They normally don't want to pay for services. They like getting free advice from suppliers, but they can't always get good advice from them.
Great.
And I'm just baffled. I mean, it's a great question. I just don't know the reason why. When we're engaged on a design basis, they defer to us and say, can you calculate the movement joints, let us know where we should place them. Some architects at least know that they need to show them on the drawings, and when they're afforded the services of a consultant, then they rely on us. But in many cases, they just ignore it. I just don't understand why, because it's one of the most fundamental aspects of architectural and engineering. You know, materials expand and contract.
So as a tile contractor, how can you promote that though? We come into the job a little bit late, you know, I mean, those specs are already written, those drawings are done. How do we get to architects and designers?
It's easy.
Thanks, James. Go.
RFI.
Yeah, so
it's RFIs.
After, you know, you bid the job per, as a contractor, you bid the job per plans and specs call out ANSI or they call out NTCA. And right then and there, you know, you have to put movement joints in. So if we don't get movement joints, we go back and we RFI the GC and say, hey, the architect needs to do something. If the architect says, well, that's your job, not mine, we say, no, actually the specifications are this way. And we learned this from Tommy Connor. You go back and you say, hey, you know, I signed my contract based on plans and specs. I guess maybe you need to write me a new contract because you're going to ignore the specifications here. If you get to that point, then it's going to be serious, but it never gets to that point in that situation. Just RFI the GC. Dave?
If you're going to have that much difficult getting that information out of the architect, you really have a decision to make. You know, do you want to go bankrupt and keep the account, you know, or do you want to make some money? If you want to make some money and the architect won't answer the question, time to move on. I'm telling you, that's the way it works. And my only other comment on that is all the years, I've only been doing this for 8 years, but then I answered phones at TCA for 10 years. I bet you I'm pressed to come up with a half a dozen times an architect asked me about thermal coefficient of expansion. It certainly isn't 10. There might have been a half a dozen times, and since I've been consulting, I can only think of 2 occasions.
I'm kind of flipping through these slides because we've got about 30 minutes left. Yeah. We've got about 30 slides left, so I'm just kind of flipping through them. I'm not going to really... We're not going to really explain anything. I kind of wanted to get back to the contractor. The other thing, I wanted Donato to expand on something. You don't go in there as a hired gun. I mean, you go down the arrow. I think most of us, everybody on the stage has a conscience and has ethics. You know, you don't go in there to kill somebody. You go in there to tell the truth. Correct.
Yeah, that's a good point that I wanted to make, is that we aren't hired guns, and unfortunately there are some experts out there who specialize either particularly in the defense, working for insurance companies, and you wouldn't believe these elaborate rationalizations that they come up with that are just not reality, that they'll use to defend or to try to get money out of the insurance company to pay for something that really wasn't valid. It's important for us that we work, you know, consistently and truthfully, and that's the first thing I say to anybody who hires us. I said, we're going to tell it like it is. You know, we're going to look out for the best interests of our client and consult with them, but we work quite often both with the plaintiff and the defense, and we work for a lot of tile contractors. And even when a tile contractor is at fault, you know, generally speaking, he isn't the sole problem on the job. There's normally a specification that's not complete or improper, so there's design issues. The general contractor has oversight responsibilities, so there's always compounding situations. So quite often we're defending people, helping to minimize their losses in a legitimate way. but we're always, you know, being truthful and honest in what we're doing. And in terms of, you know, condemning a project, that's the very last thing that we ever have to do. I mean, we avoid it like the plague. One of the things that we always do in our evaluations is we try to determine, is this an anomaly where there's certain conditions that we can identify that can be repaired, or is this a systemic issue which would require a complete replacement? So we don't take that lightly. David?
I think that we all have our limits. As an example, last week I had a guy who clad a building, 5-story building in Kansas City someplace, spotted it, no movement joints, and wanted me to defend them. He said it was the architect's fault. It's not the architect's fault. You knew you needed joints, and you knew you shouldn't have spotted it. Oh yeah, well the substrate was too far out, they couldn't afford it. I don't want nothing to do with the guy. You go get somebody else. And there ain't nobody else, I'm sure. We have our limits. We represent our clients, but you know, you can't lie about things.
Rich?
I want to just go back a couple slides to the grout.
Oh, the grout?
It said grout problem.
Okay.
Yeah, grout problem. So this is an interesting was an interesting case, you know, where the client complained that the contractor's workmanship was poor, and it appeared to them from you know, standing distance that their grout was discoloring and it wasn't installed properly. And I invoked the, you know, that famous Jack Nicholson line, "You can't handle the truth." The real truth of this is that the tile was defective. And we had to go back and make the claim or the allegation on behalf of the client to the tile manufacturer. This is a rear dot mounted, PVC
right.
dot mounted tile, and the dots are protruding very close to the surface of the grout, to a point where when the contractor grouted it, there was only a very thin cover, maybe a 1/16 of an inch of grout, and eventually that just eroded. In fact, when people would walk on this, just the pressure of walking would just cause that little piece of grout over the PVC dots to flex and break. And then, you know, after a while, it started accumulating dirt and debris and became very, very apparent. So here it started out as a claim against the contractor, and it turned out to be a claim against the tile manufacturer, and we felt, you know, compelled to make that case.
Well, similar thing to Donato. I was involved in a case where the tile contractor obviously did something wrong. It was evident. But it was compounded by the shower guy. It was compounded by the accessories guy. It was compounded by the architect and the design. And so sometimes, like when I was in that case, I was trying to mitigate the damages, like you were saying. You know, the guy was on the hook for $56 million. We got it down 8, and the lawyer's just saying, "Great job." And you're like, you walk out of there, like Dave says, you feel sick because this gentleman's out of business, but you saved $48 million. And it's a horrible feeling when you walk out, especially in a deposition. When you walk out of a deposition, it's a really bad feeling, isn't it?
It is. It's one of the reasons all of us charge so much for litigation. It's their job to make you feel stupid and look stupid and help you pick somebody else's pocket. It's a horrible, horrible place to be. That's the way I feel about it.
James,
yes.
You go back a couple to your lippage tool showing measuring lippage. We've got quite a few questions on. Go back one more, I believe, right there. We're being asked, how do you actually measure lippage for installation?
Nope.
Here we go.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I mean, maybe I'll start there. I mean, I showed you that photograph of using the digital calipers, and the idea of using the credit cards and the quarters. It's always been convenient, but that doesn't quite cut it any longer. Again, they want a highly scientific measurement of lippage, but lippage is obviously very complicated. In most cases, clients and architects don't understand that there's not only a construction tolerance, no tile can be installed perfectly flat and in alignment with another tile, so there is an acceptable tolerance for installation, but the total allowable lippage, as many of you probably know, is the aggregate of that installation tolerance in addition to any demonstrable warpage in the tile. And I know we have a slide showing that in a few moments. Maybe we could even advance to that.
Let's stop on what you said, because remember, he said the installation. He didn't say overall, and I learned this in Savannah. You know, as contractors, it's not the table you look at in ANSI or the TCA handbook. You're measuring the tile on that particular job and the inherent warpage on that job. So if you look at the table, that gives you an idea of what it is, but you're having to do that particular job, correct?
Yeah, well, actually what it is you take the value in the table. So depending on what the width of the grout joint, it's either 1/32 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch. You take that plus the inherent warpage of the actual tile. All tile has allowable warpage. So you can't take the allowable warpage within the tile, but whatever the inherent warpage is of that tile that you're installing, that plus that 1/16 or 1/32 becomes your allowable lippage. So you actually have, you know, a 1/16 of an inch allowable warpage on many jobs is acceptable.
Dave?
So to be clear, the tile is one measurement, the product, and the labor is another measurement. But it's not the maximum in the case of the tile, it's the actual. You have to actually measure that tile. You know, if the allowance is, you know, 50 thousandths of an inch, that don't mean that you can have all 50. If the tile's only warped 13 thousandths of an inch, that's all you get. And it's very difficult to measure in the field. I mean, I don't know how you guys do it, but we use machined flat stock. I mean, machined to within, I think the tolerance on it is 2 thousandths of an inch. And bar stock, and it's very difficult to transport when you get into big tiles. I think our 4-footer's within 3 thousandths of an inch. But then you have to measure it, and then the other side's going to challenge you. So you better make sure you're right, because I've had people then send it to TCA. They found some miraculously previously unobtainable attic stock, and all of a sudden it ends up at TCA and they measure it. And this has happened to me 3 times. 3 different times. I remember all of them, where they went and cross-checked me, and we averaged out. I made it.
Well, my advice to contractors are first and foremost, read the specification for the project that you're working on and see whether there is an allowable lippage tolerance specified. We've seen specifications when we do peer review of no lippage allowed,
yep.
You know, ranging to unreasonable, like 1/8 of an inch lippage. So first see what the specification requires, but most importantly, at any pre-construction meeting or even prior to that through the RFI process, sit down or request a meeting and arrive at a reasonable lippage. You know, you almost have to throw out the industry standards for a moment and take a look at the project and sit down and have a reasonable discussion between the contractor and the client and arrive at what you would think would be an acceptable or reasonable lippage tolerance for the project. Bring the tile with you. As Dave mentioned, you can do some qualitative, use a qualitative example and just bring a straight edge, or you'll see a slide here. We're just taking the attic stock tile. I think maybe, I thought there was a slide here with tile back to back, and
right
just
here.
take 2 pieces of attic stock tile and place it back to back and show the client that this tile is slightly warped at 1/16 of an inch, and that's acceptable under industry standards based on this tile size. So right off the bat, even if the installation is perfect, you're going to have a 1/16 of an inch of lippage. And if it's not perfect, you can add another 32nd to that, and voila, you have 3/32 of an inch of lippage, which to most clients is unacceptable. You have to show them and prove right up front that that's within industry standard tolerance.
So this would be a good place to do a mock-up, right?
Yeah, well,
and do a mock-up.
Right, do a mock-up, but as a
mock-up, RFI, bring the tile out, show people,
but as a tile,
have a proactive discussion.
Yeah, if you don't do a mock-up, at least take the first part of your installation. When you first get started, stop and get the owner or the general contractor, architect, get them in there and saying, okay, this is what we can do with the products that we're been given on this specification. Is this acceptable? And use that as a standard. If there's a problem, it's a lot easier making a repair then and going forward than to get through the whole job and then they come back and say, well, that isn't acceptable.
As a tile contractor, my best friend in a mock-up is also spreading the joint. You know, instead of an 1/8, I'm going to go 3/16. Pretty much with the tile today, I would say, I'm probably making a blanket assumption here, but most of the well-manufactured tile today, you can pretty much set 3/16 of the joint without inch joint without having a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we find a lot of jobs where they butt joint the tiles, and you see a lot of problems.
Don't do it.
Nope. Jim, I'm not going to get through all these slides.
It's okay.
Yeah, just keep going.
Keep going. When we get to the end, we'll have some questions.
Okay. This is the biggest problem I see.
Back up.
Hey, go back one.
Whose rulers were those?
Yeah, this is a good example about the effects of movement. So this is a 40-inch metal ruler where I put two of them together. And I went back, I think it was 1/8 of an inch is the one. And that 1/8 of an inch movement created a 2-inch displacement at the center. That's how much a slight amount of movement in a tile can cause that kind of stress, and that's why we need movement joints. Because if you don't have movement joints, how is it going to be able to mitigate that kind of stress that we know the tiles are subjected to?
So Dave's brother, Steven, showed me a video this morning of actually videoed a job exploding, and you saw the tenting happening. The tile just exploded off the floor. I think someone heard it start to crack and put their phone on, and all of a sudden it all just popped up. So Steven's sitting over here, and he might show it to you if you want to see it. So
yeah, that'd be great.
It's amazing.
But I think the biggest problem I see when I go on a job is a lack of movement joints. That's the first, right out of the box, that's the first thing. Dave?
Yeah, I agree entirely, and you know, I always thought that after writing hundreds of reports that I could cut and paste that in, but every single one is different, and I've never been able to cut and paste it yet.
Yeah, and it's compounding factors. I mean, I've seen plenty of jobs where there's not movement joints and they've survived for one reason or another. But it's generally speaking, it's when there's compounding issues. You know, the substrate wasn't properly prepared, lack of thin set contact, plus they didn't have movement joints.
Gentlemen, what I'd like to do, if it's okay, kind of move through these real quick now, get to our next poll, and then we've got a bunch of questions that you can answer. We got 14 minutes, so we'll blow through that.
Here we go.
We have to be done at 9:30 today.
Here's the next poll question. What do you think the biggest installation-related problem in the field today? Lippage, workman, can I go to the next slide?
Yeah, okay, so everybody has 30 seconds to answer this. Guys, James, you already said lippage. Gentlemen, what do you believe is?
Me, myself,
no movement joints.
Movement is my, you know, I don't care if one's higher than the other as much as I care whether it stays there. All tile is warped. All tile looks like a pillow chip. It'll either be concave or convex. It's all warped. Don't try to create some thought process that's going to say any different. It's all warped. So the question is how...
Survey says?
Yep.
Movement joints. You guys are right on. And that's what everybody agrees. 41% no movement joint.
Well, one of the things too is that, you know, you get the thin set coverage, but sometimes lack of movement joint shears the tile off the thin set, so it looks like you don't have coverage when you actually did. So those two go hand in hand a little bit, at least in my opinion, they do.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Do you want to just go to questions, Jim?
Well,
yeah, you know
workmanship.
What? Workmanship, a lot of poor workmanship. I mean, as you go through these are, hey, make it work. No.
It's about layout.
Yeah.
Quality installation requires planning and execution. That's basic. Coverage. The new NTCA trial and error video is fantastic. I mean, if y'all haven't seen that, you need to get on YouTube or do we have it on the?
It's not the old one. Yeah.
No, it's the new one.
Come to the Coverings Contractor Lounge.
Right.
And we have it on a loop version going on right there. You can see it.
The Model T's gone?
We still have it. It's in the garage.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it to add. I mean, we were talking. Actually, it's a perfect slide right here because
I like that.
The spot bonding, in my mind, has always been of epidemic proportions in terms of being a problem. But
I got more pictures.
Everyone's probably familiar with the recent changes, and I know a lot of architects and contractors as well have abused the notion or terminology of medium bed mortars, and for many years it was considered a one step method to level and correct and install tile. And we all know that that's not true, and as consultants we know for many years that that has been a huge problem, in addition to spot bonding, which again speaks to the issue of level substrates, because the only reason that a contractor will do that is in order to achieve an elevation, because the slab elevation is not appropriate. It either dips or rises or whatever, and they have to glob on mortar in order to achieve that appropriate tile surface. So that in combination with the abuse of medium bed mortars, in my mind, over the past several years has been the number one problem, a little bit less than expansion. So I was a little bit surprised by that poll number.
No methods, no standards in our industry for spot bonding. There is one
method for epoxy
on
vertical
walls,
application.
interior walls.
It's interior walls only, using an epoxy mortar, and that's it.
That's it.
One of the problems with the spot bonding that we've seen, we're doing a project right now in Los Angeles, a 5-story building. They have 30 by 30 inch slate tiles. Now they skim coated the whole back of the tile, and then they put spots on it, and they put this up. And what ends up happening is that these guys don't want to pull the tile to make sure they get good coverage, and they don't want to beat it in too hard, because then it offsets from the tile next to it. So they just kind of gingerly put it up there, and that isn't enough. If you read our ANSI standard, it says you need to beat that tile in. You need to get good contact in order to get good adhesion. So it's a combination.
James, we got like 9 minutes. Let's go to the very end.
Well, Dave,
Just a quick comment. 3 blocks away from here, I have a $9 million claim on spot bonding in showers that was reduced to $7 million and settled Tuesday for $3.5 million. Just down the road here.
So I'm looking at the first question. Why do you find that some owners go a low bid and know they will likely put up with crappy tile installations, lippage? Because the tile, remember, on a building, a commercial project, tile is 1 to 3% of the contract, okay? In our little world, we think we're all important, but overall in construction, we're really nothing when it comes to an overall construction. So they're more concerned about the toilets working, the air conditioner working, and hey, we got a good tile installation, yay. That's what I find. You guys?
All the money's gone by the time they get to the floors.
Yep.
Everybody else spent it. They've spent it on lawn or something else, but it ain't for us.
Next question.
Yeah, low bids are always a very powerful incentive in many cases, and even it's a problem even with our highest quality clients on large scale projects. There could be a $2 million, $3 million disparity amongst qualified bidders, and they are very tempted in many cases to accept that low bid. In some in the case of public work, they're obligated to do that. So there are two sides to the story. There's legal obligations in public work, and then there's just that temptation to accept low prices. In many cases, at least when we're involved on a project, we'll advise the contractor to look very carefully and compare apples with apples, and typically we find and ferret out the reasons for that $2 million disparity. Oh, by the way, we didn't bid the products as specified, or we took this shortcut or whatever. So they do have to take a good hard look at low bids.
Well, again, I mean, I was going to say on 4. Let me.
That's a great question.
There's only so much we can do as installers in NTCA to bring qualified labor, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but I'm going to say I think manufacturers and distributors can do more. I really do.
They can help us.
They can help us a lot. I think they can do more to help us with this. Dave?
Great.
The reason for the lack of licensing in general is tile's not a health and safety issue, although you could make it one. Increasingly, you could make it one. Mm-hmm. But, you know, plumbing and electrical, you can kill somebody. However, you can kill somebody with tile at this point.
Yep. Donato?
Yeah, it's, you know, one of the common things we see out there is that installers are not aware of what the industry standards are. And if you really think about it, the reason why we have these ANSI groups and Tile Council of America, it's a consensus group made up of tile contractors, manufacturers, consultants. We all get together and we establish standards to avoid reoccurring problems. We find out what are the issues out there and we come up with these standards to avoid potential problems from reoccurring. Well, if they don't know these standards, then they aren't equipped to avoid those problems. So it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that your installers know the basic industry standards. I'm talking about both the helpers and the setters. Because if you educate everybody, you create a culture of quality within your organization, making sure that you can avoid these problems. Because when there's a problem, it doesn't matter who's at fault, everybody loses in either time, money, or reputation.
And even if you pay your people by the hour or you subcontract them, you still have to have that oversight. And you still have to do, most of the problems are lack of oversight when you start running into these big jobs.
Yeah,
you have
lack of supervision.
Yep.
One other important point before we move on to the next question is that many people lose sight of the fact that the ANSI standards are specifically referenced in the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. So that's actually a legal requirement as opposed to Tile Council of North America consensus standards, which are really voluntary. So the ANSI standards are actually a legal part and a code requirement, and just like with a licensed electrician or a plumber, a tile contractor is obligated to install in accordance with applicable codes, and many of them don't understand that that obligation means to follow the ANSI standards, because that is a legal requirement of a tile installation.
Jim?
It's not voluntary.
I can't read the whole question.
Let's go to this next one. It's and I think Rich wants to answer this, but why aren't state licensing boards and registrars of contractors doing more to enforce industry standards for the tile and stone installation?
That's what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
No, I'm talking about the next question.
Oh, you got it. You got it.
Is a hollow sounding floor over a cracked isolation of failed floor, Rich?
No, I mean, in my perspective, we always say it's, first of all, acoustic sounding is not necessarily hollow acoustic sounding is not necessarily representing a defective condition. It just makes you suspect that there may be something that needs further investigation. So then we'll say you then have to remove tile and find out what the cause of a hollow sounding floor is. In many cases, tile installed over a crack isolation membrane, especially a sheet membrane, does create a somewhat of a hollow acoustic sound, and in some cases you can sound a floor and it may appear to be defective on external evaluation, and it's really just an inherent characteristic of that particular membrane. Again, it varies with the type of membrane, especially with thicker, more flexible sound control slash crack isolation membrane.
Gentlemen, because we have limited time, we'll just do like one answer to each one of these questions. Okay?
Right, I was going to have Dave do it. What are the most important areas of technical education?
Read. Buy a copy of the ANSI handbook, buy a copy of the TCA handbook, and make sure you buy the ANSI 137 1, 2, and 3. Get the NTCA reference manual and start reading. And when you're done reading them, read them again.
There you go.
Yeah.
I've been reading them forever. I wrote some of it along with these guys, and I still got to read it. Read it.
Thank you.
Belonging to NTCA or any of the associations is important. It's a great resource. They give you the information. It's great attending the Total Solutions Plus and events like this because you get a chance to network with each other and talk about some of the challenges out there. And as an organization, we can get together and provide resources to help you avoid problems.
I'll pay you for that later. Thanks, Donato.
And then, will the panel address slip-resistant testing in the field?
We're working on it.
Yep.
That's a long conversation.
That's too complicated for this.
We're going to move on. We're going to move on.
Not very.
Yeah, not very. Okay.
Right.
The answer is not very.
We're going to move on.
Is this Steve Young in here? Where is he? Steve?
Steve's not in here, but you're right. We do have a subcommittee with our technical committee that is addressing this problem right now.
When something absorbs water, it changes color.
Yeah, and one of the big problems is when the weep holes aren't properly protected, and we commonly see that. If the weep holes are plugged, then water that's getting through the grout joints into the mortar bed are being retained there, and particularly with stone, you're going to possibly get some discoloration. The ideal, the way we specify showers, is we not only put in the primary waterproof membrane on a pre-slope surface underneath the mortar bed, but we also then put a liquid applied or other membrane on top, because if you can keep the water out of the mortar bed so that it sheds immediately when draining, then you don't have any water retention there.
So I'm gonna pipe in real quick here because our subcommittee is finding it's more than water.
Well, the thing we're talking about also is you have a lack of coverage underneath there where the water can mitigate underneath there. And one of the things I think, in my opinion, is that some of these white Carreras that I'm seeing problems with are not actually white Carrera. They're actually coming from other countries of non-origin, so they're not reacting the same way that white Carrera reacts.
I have a little over 1 gigabyte of pictures of wet marble. White primarily, but a lot of beige.
Great.
So
we're in this subcommittee finding, though, that water isn't the only basis for them getting dark and changing color.
I'll send you my pictures.
Yeah, I know. I got your pictures.
Then you can argue for another week.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on because that's really going to be a difficult one.
We're working on. We just finished that.
I don't know how many boxes you go from a half-point line in the handbook to a 1-point line to a 1.5-point line. I mean, how do you do any more than you're doing?
Right, that's addressed, I think, in industry standards, and you can only do so much on that.
Well, we just finished
it's just like with lippage. Maybe what you can do as a pre-construction or RFI, say, I've noticed on this particular project the detail for wall wash lighting over the urinal, and want to bring, call your attention to. We call it the urinal effect.
But we're also
call your attention to the fact that you have that condition on this project, and I want to bring to your attention the standard that applies to that, and this is, and even show the client a picture, and this is what it could look like, but that's well within standard. Don't come back to me later and say, rip all of this out because it's unacceptable. You need to be proactive.
James, and we even, the NTCA even finished the white paper on our wall wash lighting.
We've done everything that we could.
Grazing, we need to
short of saying that you're no longer allowed to light tile installations.
Right, we have to change the vernacular too. We have to change it to wall grazing, grazing.
Yeah.
There's at least, if you go online from manufacturers, you can find maybe 3 or 4 letters, or not letters, but articles, technical bulletins, whatever. I've written on it. I think you guys have written on it too, haven't you? So all 3 of us have written articles on it. Go back to them with a dozen articles and say, here's the problem.
We're going to move on. So this now is DCOF. So
this is way too long.
Yep, I'm agreeing.
Yeah, but the simple answer to that question is addressed in the ANSI. There is a test now, but it's contained in the ANSI standard, A137.1, and there's a reference. What is it? Section 9.6. That's really bad if I can remember the sections.
All right.
It refers to the ACU test, which is a test now that uses a specific piece of equipment. That's now the standard for the tile industry. However, highly controversial, and there are There are lots of debates in all the other industries. For example, the terrazzo industry doesn't recognize that test. Even the stone industry, if any of you were at Chuck Mulbauer from MIA's installation the other day, they have not taken a formal position yet on what an acceptable dynamic coefficient of friction test is for natural stone. So we're unfortunately in a gray area. But with respect to tile, we've got a very specific test, and it's contained in the ANSI standards, but it is not an ASTM standard. The old ASTM standard's been withdrawn.
Gentlemen, our time is up. The next statement on here is for you guys. You did a great job. Thank you. It was well. If any of you want to...
Welcome.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If any of you want to stay and ask a couple questions, I'm sure they'll answer a couple questions here, but this was a great hour and a half. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
Steve's got a video sitting by himself at the table there.
Oh, yeah. You know, if you want to see this video that Steven has, Steven's right here. He'll show it to you. It's quite amazing, and it's on a floor exploding. It's okay. We know whose it is. They'll let us.
We know whose it is, and they'll say it's okay.
It's Laticretes, and it's fine.
I keep sliding out of the seat. I keep sliding.
Nice job.